From the heart of an old hippie of yours, thank you so much. Robert Hunter, God bless.
It's the Grateful Dead version that I'm hearing in my head.
That is the Grateful Dead. He was their lyricist. He co-wrote most all of their songs with Jerry Garcia. And they worked in separate states. And Garcia would send him music, and Hunter would, this is back in the day when you did everything through the mail, and Hunter would send poems back, and somehow it all worked. And but he also, if you're into this, if you're into musical obscurities, look up an album called Tales of the Great Rum Runners. This was one of several, the first of several solo albums that Hunter put out. And it's wonderful. They're all sweets. They're all stories of people. There's a neighborhood full of people, and some of them are grifters and kind of down on their luck, and some of them are saints and angels, and they all mingle, and it's just fascinating stuff, how all of this came out of his imagination. But you're not here today to hear about that, are you? No, you're not.
I'm here to hear about it.
You're here to, yeah, Jim's here to hear about it. And he didn't even know, but on some level he did. And that's kind of what I want to get to today. As we close out the series drawn from the book, Living the Science of Mind, he speaks in there about a still small voice. He teaches us, Ernest Holmes does, about intuition. What is the meaning of intuition and how intuition works? So that's what I wanted to kind of go over with you today, some thoughts on this, and also mark, as we will musically in a few moments, that tonight is the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and there are countless, they blow the shofar, the ram's horn for the month before, and all, and there are countless rituals and practices and things connected with it. One that comes to mind that's worth bearing in mind is there's a cosmology. You know what a cosmology is? It's like a story of how it all works. There's a cosmology connected to Rosh Hashanah, that there are 3 cosmic books in which your name is inscribed. And so a blessing that's given at this time is, may your name be inscribed in the book of life. That's one of the books. Another book is the book of death. Another book is the book of, I don't know what it's called, but it's like purgatory. It's the book of figuring stuff out. It's the book of making amends. It's the book of which direction I could go. I face 2 roads here. Which way will I go? With all due respect to that cosmology, I offer you another cosmology, which says there are 2 books, not 3. There's the book of life, and there's the book of will you accept life. That's it. No death, no suffering, no torment, no pain, no oblivion. And in the Jewish model, there's not a hell of eternal torment. The worst you get is oblivion. A kind of cool thing to recognize about oblivion is if there is oblivion, you won't know it. So it won't be a problem. It'll just like all be done. But in this teaching, we offer this idea that there are no unredeemed souls. Nobody's so far out there on the skinny branches that they can't be called back. There's one life, one whole embracing reality. But will you accept it? Will you accept it? Will you take it in its totality? And on that, you get to wait. And much of this time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which ends it, is about repentance, about rethinking. That's what that word means. To repent means literally to rethink. To rethink, to think again, to choose again. And so you look at your life and you say, now, am I making sound decisions here? Do I need to make amends to somebody? Is there something I need to clean up? Do I need to forgive a resentment? Do I need to forgive a regret that I have? Thereby placing myself in a position to enjoy the bounty of God. This is also the time in Rosh Hashanah that is traditionally the birth of Adam and Eve. The birth of Adam and the emergence of Eve, depending on how, because there are many different cosmologies around that. Some we know of and some are not in print for the general public, but The idea is here that this is where humankind came into the world as an agency of God. There was this universal something that needed a presence, needed a representation of itself. And for more on that, we'll get into some Gnosticism some other time, with different stories about what you and I are doing here and who we are really in terms of the cosmic equation of things. But the Adam and Eve story, I doubt you buy it literally. I haven't since I was like 4. Didn't make sense. One of the first things that didn't make sense is there other people showed up. Like, where were they? It's a metaphor. Adam is your ego. Eve is your subconscious, your subjective reality. So we celebrate Eve in a place like this. You brought your ego with you. It's not a bad thing. It has its uses. But its uses are Monday through Friday. Its uses are in your work life and business life and all the management of getting stuff done. Then there's the subconscious. And that's the Sabbath consciousness. That's the consciousness that you devote a day like this to, or at least an hour out of this day to the contemplation of it, to the subconscious. What can the subconscious mind do for you? Principally one thing. Many things, but principally one thing. And that is, it is the place where you connect to universal intelligence. The subconscious mind can remind you that you are one with the only power there is. The ego will dispute this. And it'll say, well, what about him and her and them? And this person seems to have more than I do, and that one's strange, and this one's different. And I'm afraid, and this is weird, and it's not like it used to be. It's not like the old days. That's what the ego will say. And you're not getting any younger anymore yourself, it'll say. And it'll come at you with all of this stuff. The subconscious mind says, you are my beloved, you are my beloved. And we're like, yeah, but you are my beloved. You are my beloved. Throw everything at it, but the kitchen sink says, you are my beloved. This is it. You are connected to it all. It is all part of one whole thing. That's what it can remind you. And so you're like, well, this is different. This strange incoming condition or circumstance. The ego's like, what are we going to do about this? And the subconscious says, this is God. This is God. This is God in another disguise. This is another equation of God coming at us right here. Saying that's the level on which we'll meet this incoming situation or circumstance or person. And that process is called intuition. That process is intuition. Where, whoa, this looks different, and then you remember something. You just had an intuitive moment. Intuition is different from psychic knowing. I really encourage you to grasp this idea. You may not agree with me. That's fine. But understand me. Understand what I'm telling you. Because I have looked into this heavily in my own soul. There's a difference between psychic and intuitive. And the reason why we want to jump to intuitive is because psychic has a bad name. Psychic has been trashed in our culture. Psychics are thought of as frauds. You know, I was reading the other day, in my old neighborhood, there's a psychic parlor that 3 times in the last 10 years has been busted because the people working there, the proprietor, somebody came in and they wanted love or fame or fortune or the healing of some disease or something. And the proprietor said, well, then go and empty your savings account and bring me all the cash you have. And don't ask. It's going to go in this secret compartment. Don't look in there. Don't ask what happens to this, because if you ask, there's a curse on you. There's a curse on you. And this curse, if you bother the process, everything's going to come down on your head, you know. And so 3 times people went for this and brought tens of thousands of dollars. And nothing happened. I mean, they didn't get what they wanted. They certainly didn't get their money back. And so off to jail went 3 different proprietors of this place. Here's the interesting thing. The place is still open.
Yeah.
There's now a 4th proprietor. These are not people practicing psychic knowing. These are thieves. There's a difference. And if you say all psychics are thieves, that's a clever soundbite, but the problem is then you miss out on something of value that the psychics may actually have. What you want to try to do is discern in life. Discern when somebody's pulling a fast one on you. And you're smart enough to know that. But psychic awareness is real. And there are people who are schooled and experienced in guiding you in it. But this talk isn't about them. This talk is about you. And it's about your psychic capacity to understand things. So what I suggested, this came to me at 9:30, what I suggested to the 9:30 group is I would like you to start, do you journal? Do you keep a diary of some kind? I'd like you to, you're non-committal, I see that. Not a lot of enthusiastic, oh yes, by gosh. Well, I'd like you to consider keeping a woo-woo book. You know what a woo-woo book is? It's a record of strange and unexplained phenomena that occur to you. And if you'll do that, in a month you'll need a new one. If you'll notice the times when you just know stuff you had no right to know, when things just occur to you out of the blue, when you know who's on the phone, and I know you've got caller ID, but let's assume you didn't, or you haven't looked at it, and you know, and somebody, this occurred yesterday at the class we had here. Small example, after the class, I asked one of the students, I said, have you heard lately from old so-and-so? And she said, no, I haven't, but I was just thinking about him. And I had just heard from old so-and-so. But I was just thinking about him. Now, was she really, or was she just trying to be amenable in the conversation? And you know, I believe her. And she was like, you know how you do, you get that reaction, double take. You know, I was just thinking, whoa, that's weird. I was just thinking about that. Write it off to coincidence, write it off. I mean, come on. It's not the end of the world. Write it down. Write it down in your woo-woo book, and you start the first point on a line, a chain of causation, a chain of things. I had a situation there was a kid I went to school with 50 years ago in another state who had a strange last name, and his name and face came across my mind about 5 years ago. I had not thought of this kid, I don't think he's not a kid, you know, but in the 45 years since I saw him, I don't think I thought of him once, because he was a classmate of mine. He sat 2 desks away. We weren't best buds or anything else. You know that you got a class full of 20 or 30 kids. He's just a kid, but he had an odd last name, and it came, and then the name followed with the face about 5 years ago. The next day, I had to drive to Mont Belvieu, Texas to an event. You know where Mont Belvieu is? It's sort of over north of Baytown and south of I-10 off of 146. I don't use GPS because I'm old-fashioned and irascible, so I got lost. And insofar as you can get lost in Mont Belvieu, which is 2 stoplights, but I turned down into a residential area looking for the building I was supposed to find, and looked up at a street sign, and it was that kid's last name. He had no connection to Mont Belvieu or Texas or this part of the country at all, okay? And what does this have to do with, now the cool thing would be, wouldn't it, if I told you the next day he called me, or he emailed me out of the blue, or we met on Facebook, or we did something, but none of that happened. I don't know why I was supposed to know that. Except I put it in my woo-woo book, because what it tells me is there's one mind. And sometimes it communicates information you don't need. But that's harmless. Sometimes you just know some things. And isn't that cool? And anything that builds your conviction, anything that builds your faith, just like in the use of spiritual mind treatment for manifesting specific outcomes, we used to in the old days teach it with first thing you do is manifest a parking spot. That's not a big deal. That's not the point. The point is that if you can do this one thing, it builds some conviction that you can do the next thing and the thing after that, up to the point where you're doing a really big thing. And you're accomplishing a healing, you're accomplishing a manifestation on some major level. If you'll notice in the course of a day or a week, or especially a month, which gives it enough time, a bunch of things are going to occur to you that you have no right to know, but you do. And I don't mean personal business of other people. I mean just strange connections to how things tie together. And that's because you're tapping into a wavelength of subjective information that exists everywhere. A person who is a psychic, I guess you could put a capital P on it, or a person who is a psychic, who assists other people in psychic development and stuff, is simply somebody who is focused on that wavelength. The way I have a radio station that I like to listen to. They play blues on Sunday afternoon. And I tune into this station, and while I'm tuned into it, there are all these other stations going on. As a matter of fact, as you sit here in this room, there are radio waves passing through here, that if you had a crystal set, in your head or something, you could be a radio. But you don't, and you're not. And so they pass through unnoticed. A lot of stuff is passing through unnoticed. Some of it's worth noticing. Some of it is worth gathering in. Because how would it be if you could just know? How would it be if you could pick up a thing, I don't know, say a musical instrument, and you didn't know how to play it, but you were drawn to it in some way, and suddenly the intelligence and the physical aptitude of every person who'd ever played that instrument was now present in you. You know what? That happens. That happens. What about languages? There are languages. You speak a language, maybe you speak two. I know a handful of people that speak more than that, fluently. But nobody speaks all of them, do they? But there is something that does. There is something that does. And how would it be if it just suddenly appeared in your consciousness that you knew how to communicate, you knew how to hear what someone else was saying? And that's just amongst humans. Did you see the item in the news this week about a woman was walking? I didn't get all the details, so you probably have, but a woman was walking along a street and a squirrel ran up to her and chattered and jumped up and down, and she looked at it and it looked back at her. And squirrels don't generally tend to run at people. You've probably noticed. And it came to her and it led her to its wounded baby squirrel. Aww. Yeah, that had fallen out of the squirrel nest, and she was able to take care of it. It's like the squirrel knew how to get through to its looking up. The squirrel had a woo, but look at him. And the squirrel looked up at this human and said, they're going to know what I'm talking about, because this is some serious stuff here. This is not about where I hit my winter nuts. This is about, my child. This is about my child. This is some serious stuff. So this humanoid, or whatever this is in front of me, this gigantic being, is going to get what I'm saying. And the gigantic being did. And followed. And knew. That person believed in magic on some level within themselves. How would it be if all the information of the ages were available to you? Well, it is. Ernest Holmes puts it this way. He says, we walk down the corridors of time, and on the walls, like artwork, like a gallery, a record of everything that's ever been. Every awareness anyone's ever had. Next month, we're going to get into the work of Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci, probably the greatest genius ever the human species has seen. Okay? Everything he thought of and everything he didn't is on those walls. And that's available to you. And it comes to you at the psychic level. So honor the psychic. As we get into October, and it's a time of mystery and magic, honor the psychic part of you. Honor your hunches. Honor the things you can do. I told him at 9:30 I'd bent a spoon in a workshop once, and that was cool. And the reason for bending a spoon, Uri Geller did this on the Tonight Show back in the 70s and 80s, and around 84 I bent a spoon in a workshop, and it really worked, and it wasn't a cheap throwaway spoon, it was a real spoon, and I learned that I can destroy a whole set of silverware by doing this with my mind. But that's not why I learned it. Why I learned it was, if you can do this with a meaningless object, how would it be if you could transmute base metals into gold? This is what the ancients believed. Except some of them believed that it wasn't really about making a buck or a pound or a krona or whatever it was to them at the time. It was really not about changing one metal composition into another. It was about changing the base nature of the self into the angelic nature, into the Christ nature. changing, transforming, transmuting fear, negativity, despair, and so on, into peace and poise and power within the self. That's what it is. Now, the intuitive part will take a lot less time to explain than the psychic part just did, because it's really very simple and straightforward. The intuition of you is where, if you take all the levels of self, levels of knowing, all the way from physicality, like body language and stuff, up through the symbolic and the verbal and on, up through the psychic and different layers of cognitive capacity. And you draw a big circle around all of them. The circle is intuition. The circle of intuition is the knowing of the immediacy of everything. It's all right here, right now. Call it God, source, spirit, whatever you will. So this is the awareness that you have. Like I said, when an experience is coming toward you and it's, whoa, this is different, or how do I navigate this? You turn on the intuitive channel of you and you recognize this is another simply disguise that spirit wears for the purpose of my entertainment. Like a masked ball, not a disguise like a bank robber, but a disguise like a masked ball. Would you like to go to a masked ball? Could you imagine what fun that would be? And we dance and all of this. We don't know who, or you watch the Masked Singer on TV for the purpose of, the purpose of your entertainment. See, if spirit showed up being the same person or the same condition or even the same type of person or condition all the time, it'd get boring. So sometimes it's a human you've not interacted with before. Sometimes it's a human you're not clear on how to interact before. And sometimes it's a squirrel at your feet saying, come here. Or it's like Lassie, Timmy fell down the well. Timmy fell down the well far too often on that show. They should have done something about that well. You cap a well if a child keeps falling down a well, so the collie doesn't have to come bother the family about it. Also, it's, child endangerment and stuff, but you get the idea. Sometimes it's an animal, sometimes it's a mineral, sometimes it's probably a vegetable. But it's always something that's seeking to get across to you your connection with the infinite. Do you keep a woo-woo book for that? You are that woo-woo book, basically. You are just that. So, as Holmes puts it, the intuitive capacity is never about people, places, and things. That's the psychic. The intuitive is about one thing. I am. I am. Just I am. So when you stand in the presence of the great I am, you're having the intuitive knowing. Whenever it's about, don't drive down that road because the bridge is out, or here's who's calling on the phone before they do, or just thought of old so-and-so, or whatever. All of that is the psychic stuff. And don't be afraid of the psychic stuff, because it's, who knew it real well? Your ancestors and mine. Why? Because they weren't all up in their egos quite as much as we are. They didn't have quite as much fascination with that. And there's a whole study sociologically and anthropologically about how that came to be. That difference now in the culture today than amongst the ancients. The ancients could smell when it was about to rain. I have that ability. I don't use it. I have an app for that. I have an app for most things, and so do you, and I can check it all out. But what I miss is I don't get to stretch quite so much. I don't get to stretch myself to my full capacity, and that makes me sad, And then I think, well, maybe I don't have those capacities. They were all a mirage, but they're just beyond my reach, unless I extend myself to do these things. So what I encourage you to do going forward, I encourage you to do several things. One is go home and check out our YouTube channel, watch the excellent talk that was given by Danielle Mercadal on Wednesday night here, which goes exactly to these points I've just made here. Do that, and when you finish that, sit back in your chair and close your eyes and relax and have a knowing that sounds something like this. There is one life. That life is spirit. That life is all the life there is. That life is my life right now. And that life is seeking to communicate itself to me, and it is succeeding in getting through to me. just how magnificent is this I am that I am, and all of its capacities. I am open to learning so much more about my oneness with my source, and also about the particulars that fall under that. I am open to knowing things, having talents and skills and abilities that at the present moment have no obvious application. For I will turn the next corner in my life, and there will be that instrument to pick up, or there will be that opportunity to demonstrate what I know. Perhaps one day I'll have a best friend who is from another corner of this world and speaks a different language. And maybe that language is knocking on my door right now for me to learn. And I'm like, I don't know anybody who speaks that. Well, no, I haven't met them yet. Because every future friend I haven't met yet. Every future experience is around the next bend and out of clear view. But it sends signals to me. And I pick up on these. And there's stuff that I am inclined to want to know more about, and I'm not sure why. But I do it anyway. And I gather in knowledge. And I gather in understanding, which is the application of knowledge. So that I might be ready when my destiny comes calling, which of course it always is. But there are new chapters of it all the time that open up. Something wonderful is happening in and to and through me right now, through this amazing world, and all of the godlings in it, all of the godlings who've ever been in it, and all of the godlings yet to be in it. All life everywhere conspires, or literally breathes together with me, conspires with me, for the experience of unconditional love and absolute joy, for this knowing and its manifestation in form everywhere I turn. I am so deeply grateful. I release this word now into the infinite, calling it done, and so it is.